gate, the castle of death, which Zarathustra opens, allowing a roaring wind to burst through and cast before him not a glass coffin, but a black coffin. And amidst the roaring and whistling and shrilling, the coffin burst open and spewed forth 1,000 peals of laughter. And from 1,000 masks of children, angels, owls, fools, and child-sized butterflies, it laughed and jeered and roared at me. So here's the beginning of a breaking through of that rock-like solidity of the past. And there's a lot about the rock in front of the resurrection before Jesus and so on, in a lot of that imagery too. But it's really in the next section, which is the climax as I read it of part 2, on redemption, that we see how this works. And this redemption is redemption from the spirit of revenge, der Geist der Rache, and that's revenge against impermanence, becoming, Vergänglichkeit, passing, arising and perishing, what Zarathustra calls in that section time and its it was. So that about time, that once it has become past, it seems set in stone, it seems impossible, it seems dead, impossible to resurrect. But not for Zarathustra, because he says all it was is a fragment, a riddle, a cruel coincidence, until the creating will says to it, but thus I willed it. And he said the will has been impotent, it's been caught up in this, the whole history of Western metaphysics, this revenge against passing away, and it's branding that as no good, as useless. If it passes away, then it damn well deserves to pass away. So we have to have punishment and all that whole, you know how that goes. But he says, well, if we have the will, if the will can create, then we have a different picture. Because then the creating will can say to it, but thus do I will it, thus shall I will it. But has the will ever spoken thus? And when will this happen? Has the will been unharnessed yet from its own folly of 2,500 years of Western metaphysics? Has the will yet become its own redeemer and joy-bringer? Has it unlearned the spirit of revenge and all gnashing of teeth? And who has taught it reconciliation with time and something higher than any reconciliation? Well, nobody until Zarathustra has done that. And it won't just be a reconciliation with this, that we just say we accept it, we accept our impermanence, we accept that it all becomes nothing, and that it all will become nothing. Zarathustra is teaching something higher than any reconciliation. What's that? Well, something higher than any reconciliation, the will that is willed to power must will. Yet, how shall this happen? And it's interesting to me that Pessoa explicitly connects the multiplicity of his soul with this idea that Nietzsche calls becoming or impermanence. This is on section 95. He says, no, I'm sorry, it's not. It's 91. Yeah, section 93, where he talks again in very Nietzschean terms. He says, by thinking so much, I became echo and abyss. By delving within, I made myself into many. The slightest incident, a change in the light, the tumbling of a dry leaf, several other wonderfully, poetically imagined incidents and moments. In each of these sensations, I am someone else, painfully renewed in each indefinite impression. I live off impressions that aren't mine. So, each of these impressions, they come and go, they're momentary. And he's saying at some level they aren't his. And I'll come back to that in a moment, because we want to ask, well, in that case, where are they coming from? Section 94 begins, so it's right after that. To live is to be other, to erase everything from the slate, from one day to the next, to be new with each morning. This and only this is worth being or having. To be or have what we imperfectly are. And Nietzsche would put it, to become and not have what we, because we can't have it, we can't hold on to it because it's flowing, its own rises and perishes. And there's another passage that's extremely Nietzschean, where this is in section 167, where he talks about, on the one hand, he says, the section begins, it's one of those days, seems like most of his days were like this, when the monotony of everything oppresses me like being thrown into jail. The monotony of everything is merely the monotony of myself, however. Each face, even if seen just yesterday, is different today, because today isn't yesterday. Each day is the day it is, and there never was another one like it in the world. Only our soul makes the identification, a genuinely felt but erroneous identification by which everything becomes similar and simplified. And as you know, that's a classic theme in Nietzsche. Life needs the falsification of pretending to ourselves that there is anything at all, that there's something is the same thing as it was yesterday. Because if we are to deal moment by moment with the flux of experience, we go under unless at very peculiar moments, I think we see Zarathustra surviving that. As Bartholomew said, my reading of Nietzsche is, well, he didn't say it, but he said, I work mainly these days in Chinese and Japanese philosophy, where the same premise, everything is impermanent, everything is transformation, everything is changing, and nothing remains the same. Except in those traditions, there are, since the Buddha, because it's only really when Buddhism comes to China that they really develop the Buddhist notion of temporality as momentariness, that everything arises and perishes at every moment. Duration is an illusion that we need in order to get to work in the morning, in order to read a page of poetry, in order to do anything, but it's totally illusory. There is no duration, there is nothing but punctuated flashings into and out of existence of the whole universe, moment by moment. And I think this is very much what Nietzsche's notion of temporality is. I think it's also Heidegger's. And it's certainly what you find in Chinese Buddhism and in Japanese Buddhism, traditions that have evolved practices such as sitting meditation for us to deal with that. And there's an acknowledgement there, as there is in Nietzsche, where he talks about life needs falsification in order to live, in order to be life. Well, can we get behind or around or beneath that falsification? Is there anywhere, or are we condemned to live the lie of simplification, the lie of the results of simplification? I think it's clear that in Nietzsche there's a way. People say, well, Nietzsche didn't engage in any kind of sitting meditation, which he didn't. But the sitting meditation in Chinese and Japanese Buddhism is just one end of the spectrum, because the really important moment is getting up off the pillow, the moment when your bottom comes off the sitting cushion, because it's all practice. It's all trying to live those moments as they really are, rather than through some some falsified duration laid on top of it. In Nietzsche, you don't have that. You have him rather hiking 6 to 8 hours a day, whether in the streets of Genoa or Venice or the paths of Sils Maria. That was how he said, you can't sit thinking, you can't think sitting down. He said, you've got to be moving where all the muscles, not just the muscles of the cerebral cortex, but where all the muscles are celebrating a feast and festival. Now that's one way. The other way I think we see coming up in Zarathustra, every time before the thought of eternal recurrence, he is flat out. Nietzsche at one point calls it incubation. And Nietzsche, as you know, during those 72-hour migraine headaches that he had, spent a lot of time flat out, just lying motionless. And he did some thinking in the intervals between the headaches. And so you have both in the Zen tradition and in Nietzsche, I think, you have a continuum between absolute stillness and absolute every muscle in motion, as these are the two physical poises. They're not quite postures, but if you're moving, it's a matter of poise, about the balance of the body. Yeah.
Regarding meditation, as far as I know, meditation is done in order not to think at all. So it's the complete opposite then, just to empty your mind.
Mm-hmm. Good point, thank you. Some forms of meditation are, but not the forms that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Some forms of meditation, you close your eyes, you contemplate your navel, you do chakra stuff, and so on and so forth. There are many forms like that, and they're good for all kinds of things, I'm sure. The forms that I'm talking about from the Mahayana Buddhist, the late Buddhist tradition, you sit with eyes open because the idea is it's an opening out. It's an opening out, and we have a group in Cork where we sit, sometimes you sit facing the wall with your eyes open, but you can sit around the room, and so you're aware that this is something. Chan Buddhism in China was awakening is a social event. Enlightenment is not an individual thing; it's a social event that is confirmed by dynamic interaction with the world and with others. Now, the question you raise is wonderful, because in the greatest Japanese Zen thinker Dogen from the 13th century, he has 3 categories. He said there's thinking, there's not thinking, and certainly there is a stage in that meditation where the Chinese call it fasting the heart-mind, just letting it go, emptying it out, just like all that furniture of the mind, just clutter just gets in the way. So you do move from thinking, which is what most of us spend most of our time doing, thinking in the Cartesian sense of any mental events whatsoever. And if you ever stop for a moment and just sit for a while, it's a madhouse in there. There's one damn thought after another. It's craziness. But after a while, it calms down. They get tired, whoever they are, they get tired of doing what they're doing. And gradually you get to a state of no thinking. It's just openness. And then you're aware of what's really happening. And this is the distinction that I would make between what you have to do to survive and what you might want to do in order to experience what's really going on. And for Nietzsche, we need to get rid of that clutter. He had to go up to the Engadin most of the time. And there he said it's in a letter, he said, it's my favorite place of incubation. It's quiet, and I can hear my innermost voices. And I think with Nietzsche what happens is, once that insanity of ordinary thinking gives up, fades away,